Hi, I'm Stephanie Jaworski of joybaking.com. Today we're going to make turtle brownies, and this is what they look like. These are named after the chocolate turtles you can buy, and they start with a really fudgy brownie on the bottom. We're going to top that with a layer of caramel mixed with pecans, and then a nice drizzling of chocolate over the top. This is taking brownies to a whole new level. So the first thing you need to do is to preheat your oven to 325 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 165 degrees Celsius. And then you will need an 8-inch square pan, and that's 20 centimeters. And then you need to line it with a piece of foil. I like to have the foil come just a little over the top so that it's easy to remove the brownies later from the pan. And then you can either butter your foil, or I'm just going to spray it with one of these non-stick sprays. That's our pan. So now for our brownie layer, you will need a saucepan of simmering water because we are going to melt our chocolate and butter. So in a heat-proof bowl, I like to use stainless steel. You will need 4 ounces, which is 120 grams of unsweetened chocolate. That means there is no sugar in this chocolate. And if you buy it in block form, then, you know, just coarsely chop it. I'm using these little wafers that melt pretty easily. And then you will need a half a cup, that's 113 grams of butter. I'm using the unsalted. You could use salted. And then just cut it into large chunks because it will melt a lot faster than if you have a big block of butter. And then we're just going to put it over our saucepan of simmering water and just melt till everything's smooth. Okay, so our chocolate is melted. So we're just going to remove that from the heat. Now at this point, what I like to do is to just feel the chocolate. If it's really hot, then you want to just let it cool down to lukewarm. Mine is about lukewarm, so we can carry on from here. So I'm just making this by hand. You don't need an electric mixer or a hand mixer. You just need a wire whisk for this. So the first thing we're going to do is add our sugar. You need 1 cup, that's 200 grams of granulated white sugar. Now that may sound like a lot, but remember we used 4 ounces of unsweetened chocolate, and that is really bitter, so we need the sugar to sweeten that. So just whisk it in. And then you will need 2 large eggs, and have your eggs at room temperature. If you want to go by weight, that's about 105 grams of eggs. And I'm just going to add 1 at a time. Whisk that in. So this is why you don't want your chocolate like too hot, because you don't want to cook your eggs. And then I'm going to add the second one along with 1 teaspoon, 4 grams of pure vanilla extract for flavoring. If you don't want a vanilla flavor, you could leave out your vanilla extract. Okay. And just give this a nice, gets a little hard. Your arm gets a bit of a workout. See, it's nice and shiny and smooth. That's what you're looking for. And then we're going to add some flour. You will need 3/4 of a cup, that's 95 grams of all-purpose flour. You may know that as plain flour. And then I'm going to add 1/4 teaspoon, 1 gram of salt. If you use salted butter, then you could probably just leave out that salt. And then just mix that in. And that is our brownie base. Pretty easy. It's a great thing about brownies. So now we're going to bake our brownies for about 25 minutes. You know, everybody's oven is a little different. What you're looking for is, you know, the top will be set, but when you put a toothpick into the center, what you want is still some moist crumbs like batter clinging to that. You don't want your toothpick to be clean. want them a little, we want kind of a dense and fudgy brownie, so try not to overbake them. Okay, and then you can just use the back of a spoon, or I'm using an offset spatula just to spread this out. So make sure you get the corners. Okay, so about 25 minutes. Okay, so our chocolate brownies are done. As you can see, the top is set, and a toothpick inserted in the center still has some moist crumbs clinging to it. So now I just put on a wire rack. We're going to let that cool down a little, but meanwhile we're going to start our caramel. But first, you will need 1 cup, which is 100 grams of toasted and then just coarsely chopped pecans. So I like them toasted, so I just put them into the oven, the same oven temperature as I cooked the brownies, for about 6 minutes, and just until you start to smell them, and then just let them cool and coarsely chop them. So for the caramel, now if you kind of go, I just can't, I'm not comfortable making caramel, I am going to tell you a kind of a cheater's little trick. You can take 20 Kraft caramels, unwrap them, that's about 140 grams. So unwrap those, put them in a saucepan along with 1/4 cup, 60 grams of heavy whipping cream, and just melt them. You could just do that, but I'm not going to do that. I am going to show you how to make a caramel. So you will need a medium-sized, heavy-bottom saucepan. And then you will need 1/2 cup, which is 100 grams of granulated white sugar. And then I'm going to add 1/4 cup, which is 90 grams of a light corn syrup. The corn syrup really helps to prevent sugar crystallization, which means a grainy caramel. That's why I like to add some. Did I say you could use golden syrup if you don't have light corn syrup? And then you will need 2 tablespoons, 25 grams of just, tap water, and some salt, 1/4 teaspoon, 1 gram of salt. And then you will have ready 1/4 cup, 60 grams of a heavy whipping cream. That's cream with a 35 to 40% butterfat content, and also 1 teaspoon, 4 grams of pure vanilla extract. So now what we're going to do is put this on medium heat. I think the important thing and then just stir it, we're going to just we want the sugar to melt, and we want to bring it just up to a boil. I think the important thing when you're making caramel is not to have your heat too high. The big thing is burning your caramel. We've all done it. So, and the good thing is it's pretty inexpensive to make, so the first time you can start to smell it burnt, then you can start over again. But don't have your heat too high. Be patient when you're making caramel, and then I think it'll be okay. So I'm just going to stir this continuously. The sugar will melt, and we're just going to bring it up to a boil. Okay, as you can see, we're coming up to a boil. There we are. So what I like to do, I'm just going to turn that down just a little. So I like to just put the lid on my pot, and that will wash down the sides of make sure all the sugar has dissolved. You could take a pastry brush with the little water and just brush the inside, but I just put that on for maybe 30 seconds. Fast and easy way to do it. And then, okay. So now what we want to do, we don't want to stir it anymore. You don't want it too vigorous of a boil, I find. So about like that. And then what we're going to do is just continue to boil this until it gets a really nice deep caramel color, which can take probably around 10 minutes. What you want to do every once in a while, especially when it starts to color, is to just swirl. So you have even browning and cooking, and that prevents any burning. So we're just going to let that boil away until it starts to get a caramel color. Okay, so at this point you can see I'll just give it a quick shake here. You can start to see it is taking on that caramel color. Of course, the more color, the deeper the caramel flavor. Okay, we're getting pretty close here. This is a point where you really want to start swirling your pan so you don't burn. Nothing worse than burnt caramel. Doesn't taste very good. Okay, so that looks pretty good to me. I'm just going to give it just a second more. Okay, I'm going to go with that. Okay, so you take it off the heat and then very carefully put in your cream. It's 1/4 cup, 60 grams of heavy whipping cream. And see, it does sputter and boil. And then your teaspoon, 4 grams vanilla extract. And whisk vigorously. Or you can just use your spatula and then just make sure you get the corners. And then you could, when it cools down, of course, you could taste it. Some people like their caramel to be a little more salty, so you could add more salt. Your preference here. So that looks good. So at this point, I am going to add that 1 cup, 100 grams of my chopped pecans, or maybe you say pecans, depending on where you live. It's like you can say caramel or caramel, I guess, depending on part of the country you're from. Okay, so there we have, oh, I got some of my pecans stuck in there. Guess you shouldn't use your whisk for this point. Okay, so let's just give this a stir. Oh, it looks pretty good. Oh, it smells wonderful in here. So now we have my brownies have, they're still warm, but they're not hot. So what I'm going to do, I have to use, that handle's a little hot. Just pour that over the top. Okay. And then you can just take the back of a spoon, or I'm using an offset spatula, and just spread this. And then what you want to do is let this cool a little, cool down to room temperature, and then you can cover it and put it in the fridge, because what we want to do is firm everything up, both the caramel layer, especially the caramel layer, and the brownie, and then because you want that firm, because then we're going to drizzle some melted chocolate over the top. So I find you need to cover and put it in the fridge maybe about an hour. And then when we come back, we will finish off our brownies. So now we're ready to make our chocolate topping for our turtle brownies. First, I'm just going to lift my brownies out of the pan using the foil and just peel that back a little. And then what you want to do is take 1 ounce, which is 30 grams of a semi-sweet or a bittersweet chocolate, along with 1 tablespoon, about 13 grams of heavy cream. Just put those together, and then I just pop it in the microwave to melt it. But do it in short blasts, like maybe 10 seconds. Take it out, give it a good stir, and then if you have to put it back in, because you don't want to overheat your chocolate. And so then you're left with this. So, I mean, we're just going to drizzle it over the top. You could just use your spoon, or you could just take, I'm just taking a piping bag, or you take even like a plastic Ziploc bag and just put your chocolate in there. So, and then just gonna cut the end off here, scissors. Just doing a little bit of a, see if I, okay. And then you can just, you know, drizzle back and forth as much as you want, or as little. And then once you do this, then I usually just pop this back in the fridge. Before you cut it into the brownies, into small squares, you might want to just pop this back to get this chocolate hardened. Take like 5 minutes or something. And there we have our turtle brownies. So I'm just going to try a piece, but chocolate's still a little. Now I tend to cut these into pretty small pieces because they are very rich. I usually get about 36, so I mean you can just cut them as big or as small as you want. And the great thing about these, they will keep in the refrigerator for almost a week, or you could freeze them for a couple months. They're very good frozen, like after they're frozen. Actually, I do eat them right out of the freezer frozen. Oh. You know, I love chocolate turtles, the candy. And I love these. You have a really deep chocolate. Using that unsweetened chocolate gives you a really deep flavor in the brownies. And then, of course, they're quite fudgy. And then you have the caramel with pecans. And then more chocolate. What's not to like? So try these. And until next time, I'm Stephanie Jaworski of joybaking.com.